All right, welcome to our next installment of the Sermon on the Mount. We have made it all the way to our fifth case study now. As you recall, we started with the Beatitudes. We talked about the metaphors, the whole sermon body concept of Jesus explaining, expounding upon what true righteousness is. And we started with this first triad of case studies, demonstrating that Jesus was really interested in all of us honoring human dignity. We all have the image of God upon us, every person, and so it is to be honored. So we're in the second triad now. We talked about oaths last week, and so today we're going to talk about this idea of the retaliation. So we're in Matthew the 5th chapter, and let's begin by reading this section beginning in verse 38. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist him who is evil. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, let him have your coat also. And whoever shall force you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. This has to be one of the most difficult sections of the Sermon on the Mount as we read it in our Bibles. There's so much counterintuitive about what Jesus is teaching and asking us to express the righteousness of God in these words is one of the most challenging parts of the Sermon on the Mount. It belongs here. It fits so well, as we're going to try to demonstrate. But what he's talking about now is, what do you do when you're faced with a personal injustice? What do you do when somebody harms you or insults you in some way? How do you deal with that as a citizen of the kingdom of heaven? And you don't resort to your human instincts when you're confronted with that. We rise above the animal instincts that are placed within us for reason, and we have the discipline to do better, to become more in the image of our Creator. And so that is the challenge that we're dealing with today. This idea of retaliation. Now, and this concept of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, didn't originate with Jesus, and it didn't even originate with the Torah. There are writings that predate even the Torah that talk about, here is how you handle it if you are in conflict with somebody and you receive an injury. Even in the ancient code of Hammurabi, he was an old Babylonian king, ancient king, and he had this something like 100 laws that they lived by, and almost verbatim, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth was a concept that was taught in the Code of Hammurabi as well. So this isn't original with the Torah. And so this is a human attempt to find justice in a world full of injustice. Somebody injures you. What recourse do you have? Well, our human impulse is to injure them in retaliation, right? Well, over time, it developed in, rather than, can you imagine? You're in conflict with somebody, you're in a fight with somebody, your eye gets plucked out. Okay, so all the dust is settled, and now you're talking about the consequences of this. All right, so here's what we're going to commonly do. We're going to now take your eye out. Can you imagine this scene? It's you cannot imagine it, can you? Can you imagine that happening in the United States? No. And so now we've, that concept is somewhat evolved. We do attach monetary equivalents to things of that nature. We try to, what we say, do right by people in the legal system by having people pay money or pay with jail time or something one way or another. But we really don't, take an eye for an eye, or if I'm in a bar brawl and get my tooth knocked out, well, all right, we're going to take one of yours. I mean, even in the Torah, it says fracture for fracture. Can you imagine? All right, I broke my arm, and because of something that you did, maybe it was because you had an unsafe work environment that you created. And now I've broken my arm. So all the dust is settled for that. So now we're going to make that all right by breaking your arm. It seems to complicate the issue, doesn't it? Somewhat. But there's also this sense of justice that, yeah, that's right. Somebody has done something wrong, and now they have to understand. And so there's this concept of justice and this concept of, well, this is what's going to restrain people from perpetrating the injustice to begin with, knowing that if I am the cause of somebody breaking their arm, I'm going to get my arm broken. So I'm going to be more cautious and careful with the way that I treat everybody. So we're talking legal terms here. And we've said all along that Jesus isn't throwing the Torah away. He isn't removing that. He's not saying, no, that's wrong. He's giving a fuller meaning to it, a deeper understanding of it. Now, these laws were put into place to begin with for some good reasons. It wasn't that this was allowing for personal vendettas. What we're talking about here are legal repercussions in dealing with these things. So these are not things that are measured out personally, but these are measured out societally. Okay, first of all, we need to understand that. And so when the law is eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, what he's doing, the wisdom in that idea is that we're going to put a cap on, a ceiling on the retaliation that's going to happen. If somebody pokes your eye out, you don't get to poke out two of theirs. You don't get to take their life. So there's a sense in which there's this effort of being equal, bringing everything to equality. And so the concept, or this law of eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, it put a ceiling on how much retaliation or how much the penalty would be. The second thing that it did, it prevented the escalation. Now, I'm from Kentucky. You know this about me, right? Did you know that I'm a descendant of the Hatfield family? I am indeed. And Uncle Devil Ants, he had his way of dealing with what he perceived to be injustice. And in those kind of blood feuds, there was no ceiling on these things, was there? There's the perception of you wronged my family and now I'm going to wrong your family. And then the other family says, well, you've wronged me more and I'm going to have to exact some more vengeance here. And it just continued generation after generation. The Hatfields and McCoys are a classic example of that, of the escalation of blood feuds that occur when you're trying to deal with vengeance in an undisciplined way. Vengeance is not even the right word to use. But Jesus, like he's been doing since the Beatitudes, is turning our world upside down here. And he says something unthinkable as we read it in our Bibles. Don't resist the evildoer. Well, what? There's more to this than meets the eye for us in our cultural context and our English translations as we've tried to deal with some of these issues. Jesus is actually, as I've read some of the commentators on this, I did not come up with this, of course. Jesus is actually using a play on words here. A play on words. Don't resist the evil, the one who would do evil to you, is a similar word. That idea of resist is a similar word to the word that he used for eye for an eye. That doesn't make it in our English translations. And the idea of this, let me just try to shorthand this for you. The idea of this is when you are reacting to an injustice and you stand against it, don't stand in a way that matches eye for eye. Don't resist in kind, is the point that Jesus is making here. Don't resist in the same manner. And that whole concept is missed in our English translations because we don't see the pun that Jesus used, the play on words there. And so it appears that Jesus is calling on us to be completely passive. And I'm going to suggest to you that is not the case at all. Jesus uses, Matthew is recording this, three examples in this one situation. He says if someone wants to slap you on the right cheek, if someone wants to sue you and take your shirt, if someone's going to force you to walk a mile. All of those have cultural baggage that we need to understand. Now, we've talked a little bit about being forced to go the 1 mile by the Roman soldier and his pack. All right, a little bit last week. We're not going to belabor that, but the culture of these things really matters, and it's important for us to really get a handle on these things. But hear this summary that I'm going to try to give right now. Jesus is asking us, rather than to focus on the injury, focus on the people, even the perpetrator. Put your focus on the people who bear the image of God, right? And that will change things dramatically. And so this first example he gives, somebody slaps you on the right cheek. Why not the left cheek? Why the right cheek? Well, you have to understand some cultural business here. If you're facing somebody and they slap you on your right cheek and they're right-handed, like most people are, what kind of slap is that?
That hard one.
It's hard, but it is a backhand. Somebody slaps you on the right cheek, it looks like this. And what is that?
Insult. It's an insult.
That's an insult. That is somebody saying, I'm in this station of life, and you're beneath me. This is an action of contempt.
And a challenge.
And it is a challenge as well. It is a challenge. And so this is an insult to somebody's honor. This is and if it's done in public, there's even more attached to that, right? That's a public shaming of somebody. To backhand them, So it's not so much about a severe injury here, it's about a dishonoring of yourself. So you've be dishonored. You have been shamed. You have been told that your station in life is beneath this other person's station. And maybe other people have seen this. So there's this sense of social rank or dominance. The one who does the backhanding is the dominant one in this scenario. And so Jesus says, what do? What do you just walk away passively? Do you accept the insult, the dishonor? Do you do nothing? No. It's not about being passive, but it's rethinking creatively your response to this. Jesus is genius. Okay. And so instead of skulking away in your humiliation, you stand there. And you offer your left cheek, which requires what? An open-handed slap. You are, maybe I'm stating this a little strongly, you're daring that person. You're saying, you're making a comment on my social status. You're dishonoring me. Do you have the willpower to continue this narrative? Will you slap me with your open hand? That puts the pressure on the other guy. It's requiring this other person now to reevaluate the statuses of these two people. I've humiliated him, but he doesn't appear to be humiliated. He stands and says, will you dare slap me with an open hand? This is a manner of a person reclaiming their own personal dignity and not being defined by the humiliation of the other guy. This is not nothing. This is not passive. This is a creative reaction to a situation where you have been unjustly referred to as less than.
But without violence.
Without violence. There's no escalation of violence. This is an intelligent response of Jesus saying, here's how you put the shoe on the other foot. Now, Jesus can't give us every example of every situation of how we're going to do that, but he challenges us to use your creativity and use your imagination and use the righteousness that is built up inside of you to come to terms with how you're going to deal with these conflicts. You don't reduce yourself to that level. You rise above and you reclaim your own personal dignity. When Paul's making commentary about some of these things in 1 Thessalonians, the 5th chapter, I think Paul was feeling the urge to give further explanation to these words of Jesus because they can be so misunderstood. 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 15, see that no one repays another evil for evil, but always seek after that which is good for one another and for all men. Wow. That's a pretty good commentary on eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. He further said in Romans the 12th chapter, verse 14, bless those who persecute you and curse not. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not be haughty in mind. Verse 17, never pay back evil for evil to anyone. Respect what is right in the sight of all men. If possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. Never take your own vengeance, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him a drink. For in doing so, you will heap burning coals upon his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. There's another good commentary on what Jesus is talking about here. Now, there's more that we could say about that, but I don't have time. We have other examples. You may have something you'd like to say about that. Feel free.
I like how Paul there in Romans 12 talks about you're taking your revenge. You're heaping burning. That's the reaction. We want to take revenge, and so he doesn't say don't even think in those terms, but act completely opposite to what normal vengeance is. And
Yeah.
so you're taking your revenge by doing good.
Yeah. You're placing the pressure on the other person. And that's what the offering of the left cheek does. Is what
There's not much that's more disarming than kindness to an enemy.
right.
That's the first thing. Second thing is, what does that verse mean, heaping coals of fire? I've never understood it.
I think we just talked about it. I think when Jesus says you're reclaiming, well, as I said, what Jesus is saying, you're reclaiming your dignity, you're standing up, you're challenging the other person. Can you continue to think of me the way you've been thinking of me when I'm doing this kindness to you? Those coals should act upon the conscience of that individual to change their mind about their decision to backhand you, right? I think those two concepts go hand in hand. I may not be right about that, but that's how I'm looking at that. Yes, Chris?
Whether it's human nature or society or whatever, strength is often measured in terms of action. And Jesus demonstrated, while it's on the cross, besides his teaching, that true strength comes from self-control, being in charge of yourself and basically of the situation.
Yeah. So this is a complete reorientation of our thinking and of our instincts. It's radical, isn't it? Jesus' words are radical. When you experience these real life exchanges with evil, it's now so very important to have the kind of decision making and discipline to do the right thing in that moment. Okay. Example number 2. Another example of a legal matter. Somebody wants to sue you and take your shirt. Let him have your coat also. Okay, Jesus, you just want me to be a doormat? Is that what you're saying here? You want me to be a doormat? Jesus is, again, presenting the difference between following an ethical principle in contrast to a legal principle. Okay? And so there's a law in Exodus, the 22nd chapter. If you are in an engagement with somebody and they are providing surety for something or another, a guarantee of something, you can take their coat. Okay? Their outer garment, that which keeps them warm. But in Exodus 22, verse 26 says, but when the sun goes down, you give it back. Because it gets cold at night. This is their blanket.
22 what?
22, 26. You want to go ahead and read that, Cece? You have that? Exodus 22, 26.
I don't, but I can get there.
Okay. Oh, I thought you were there. All right. So, imagine the exploitation of poor people is what's taking place here. The poor person has nothing, but he needs to borrow. And what do you have for collateral? Well, the shirt on my back is what I have. Okay, I'm going to take your shirt. The Torah says nothing about me having to give your shirt back. So I'm going to leave you with that scratchy wool tunic to be the only thing between you and your skin. Somebody is in that situation where they're exploiting a poor person and saying, yeah, I'm going to take your shirt. Jesus says, flip it. Oh, you want to take my shirt? Here. Take my coat also. Now, it's hard for you and I to relate to this. I open my closet and I'm ashamed. How many clothes are jammed in there? In this day, the poor people commonly would have an inner garment that would be against their skin, a shirt, and an outer garment, a coat or a tunic. And they may take the tunic off if they're working in the heat of the day, but when the sun sets, it gets cold, you're going to need that. That's why you give it back to them at night. So here's this man, this poor man who's being oppressed by this lender who's suing him. All right, I'm going to need to take your shirt then. And this poor man says, oh, you want to take my shirt? Here, take my tunic as well. Which, what's that look like? That is a man standing there naked, without any protection from the elements at all. And imagine this in a public arena, where this man is suing, oh, you're going to take my shirt? Well, here, take my coat too. Now, that, just like the slap, it's painful to endure that. But this poor person is saying, here, take my coat also. Now, this isn't just a matter of him being ridiculously generous or saying, I affirm that I will pay you back. This is a matter of him putting all of the focus on the man who's oppressing him and saying, are you willing to leave me naked without protection? Is that the kind of person you are? That's not nothing. That's not passive. That is an ingenious way of flipping the script entirely and causing them to think about that in quite a different way. Stacey, did you ever get to Exodus 22? Oh, never mind. I told you what it said. Yes, Amy.
So I'm, trying to wrap my head around all this, and I feel like I'll just use Matt and I as an example. If he were to say something to me similar to this in whatever disagreement we might be having, I would feel like he was being passive aggressive, which doesn't feel like a godly thing.
I think Jesus' suggestion would be passive aggressive in these situations.
Okay. Well, that doesn't sound like Jesus to me. Like, I've never thought of Jesus as passive aggressive.
That's at the verse.
We're dealing with injustice. Injustice needs to be addressed, but not with violence. Yes, please, go ahead.
If you ever take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, you are to return it to him before the sun sets.
All right. Yeah, that's kind of what I said. Right?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
All right. So and the reason for that is obviously clear. Yeah, Jan.
Also, if you give away your coat, he's required to come back and give it back to you after the sun goes down. So
That's what the law says.
So,
Yeah.
so he's not done yet.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point as well. But can you see here where the person who is being oppressed is raising the stakes, not going away in humiliation? It's obvious that is the attempt to humiliate. They're raising the stakes. You're going to allow me to remain naked in public and have this scene of injustice play out for all of the community? Are you willing to do that? So it brings shock and attention to what injustice is actually taking place. And we need to do that. We need to bring attention to injustice when it is taking place.
But not with an attitude of, I would say not with an attitude of, like what you said, what was it they said?
Passive aggressive?
I don't see that as being the attitude you bring. You bring it with love, like
Absolutely.
not with, I'm going to show everybody. No, your heart is.
Still a little bit of a mind game.
Yeah,
It is.
It is.
It
It's
is
a mind
absolutely
game,
a mind
but not in an evil
So-
way.
Yeah, there's generosity on the part of the poor oppressed man. He's using his generosity, though, to bring an expose to the injustice. I mean, there's no getting around that. Oh, wow, you all want to talk about this. Okay. All right, Kelly.
Well, the person who's been treated unjustly, a lot of what he has been talking about in the Sermon on the Mount is bringing that person peace. You're not going to find personal peace if you have hatred in your heart towards a person who's oppressing you, and wanting to retaliate in anger. He's wanting you to be able to sleep at night and rest and know that the law and God is going to have this person facing the consequences. That's not our responsibility to do. And when you burn with anger, you don't sleep. You have stress on your body. It affects, your attitude, and it ruins, your attitude and consumes your every being. So if you can just flip the script back on the person who's being rude to you, and double down. And did you really mean to do this to me? That's a way of standing up for yourself, but also not adding to the evil that is happening by contributing to that.
Good point. I think what occurred to me when you're saying that is when Nathan the prophet comes to David and tells him this story of injustice. And David is outraged about that. And then Nathan says, "You are the man." That's the kind of reaction that we're trying to elicit from the perpetrator of injustice.
So it seems like what's happening is someone attacks you in some way, and you're agreeing with the attack, and you're even amplifying it to expose the attacker and what he's doing. So he may have attacked at the level of 5, and you're taking it to 10 with what you're doing.
Or to challenge, maybe, I think you both said the same thing. You said it in a more aggressive way. I think Kelly.
All right, I'm aggressive. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it, because you know what's on my heart today, and I wanted to get to, and I'm not going to have time to really deal with this, is the civil rights movement. All of us are pretty young to think about the civil rights movement, but in 1965, when there was the march in Selma, and the law enforcement of that day, how did they deal with peaceful marchers? They brought out fire hoses and they brought out dogs. And what did those people do?
They just stood still.
And they continued to go forward as they could, without resistance. They didn't skulk away in humiliation. They stood there. They were dealing with the injustice by nonviolent measures. How do you think that they got to the point where they could do that? They had been trained, extensively trained. They went through scenarios that they were sitting at lunch counters and their teachers would scream at them and intimidate them. And they went through all of that. And they continued to march forward. And what that did was it showed what a farce it was for the authorities of that day. How they exposed law enforcement for what they were doing to them at that time. But this training, I'm telling you, Martin Luther King Jr., he read Jesus' words. He had an understanding and a grasp of this concept that we're talking about. Resistance without violence. And so he actually came up with his own 10 commandments of how they were going to accomplish this purpose of this particular march. And their pledge was to a non-violent movement. And he made people sign a document that they would not be violent in this. And some of the commands were, we are going to seek justice and reconciliation, not victory. You can imagine. And we are going to walk in love because God is love. We're going to sacrifice our personal wishes for all men to be free. These were some of the 10 commandments that he spoke and trained those people And I'm telling you, that's Jesus style. He had Jesus on his heart. Yes, Charlotte.
Well, it makes me think of our world today. I mean, that was back then. But today, when people go to abortion clinics and stand out there and pray, and then they get arrested and sent to jail, what could those people do with this kind of mindset that would keep them from going to jail? Why even though they're not being violent or anything, they're just praying for these people going into the clinic to murder their babies, not to get, why are they going to jail for it?
Yeah, King and his followers went to jail many times.
Okay.
Many times. So that's one way of bringing to light the injustice.
Okay.
So non-resistant or resistance without violence. And the hope of all of these things is, of course, to again flip the script and to effect change in the heart of the perpetrator of the injustice, right? That's the point we want to get to, not just the passive aggressiveness, not just my personal aggressiveness. So I know our time is gone. I know you have more to say, so we will pick up there. Here we go. We will pick up there next week, and we will complete all of the case studies next week. That's my commitment.